So in the last session, we have already discussed about the difference between ASPICE 3.1 and ASPICE 4.0 on a higher level. And in today's session, we are going to get a bit deeper into some of the processes, because once we start in the V model on the left side, normally the first process under the VDA scope is SYS2, which is System Requirement Analysis. So we'll get inside the process, look at the process purpose, process outcomes, and also compare the best practices of ASPICE 4.0 against ASPICE 3.1, and we'll see what best practices have been completely taken out, what have been modified, and are there any new best practices as such, and what is the difference when it comes to the nodes. So this kind of a comparison we'll do. Okay, I think you can share. All right, so we have a nice comparison of both the standards, especially when it comes to SYS2, System Requirement Analysis. On the left side, you can see the best practices which have been available in ASPICE 3.1 SYS2 process. And on the right side, we can see the best practices which have been listed out as a part of the ASPICE 4.0. Now for the viewers to give a bit of an idea how the color coding works, all the best practices which have been named or which have been, let's say, noted with the color black, which means they are same in both the versions of the standard. Wherever you see the color red, which means it has been taken out completely in the new version of the standard, and the orange color would mean that it has been modified in the newer version of the standard. Maybe it's been combined with something else, or maybe the context has been identified a bit different in the new version of the standard, or something like this, which we will discuss in detail. So when I look at this particular slide, colleagues, maybe on a higher level, I see that best practices have been reduced in comparison to ASPICE 3.1. Seems to be a good, let's say, update. So less best practices to work with, because we had like eight best practices in ASPICE 3.1, and we have now 6 best practices in, let's say, ASPICE 4.0. Now coming to the best practice 1, we definitely don't see any difference, because the BP1 is specified system requirement, which was same in the ASPICE 4.0 as it was in ASPICE 3.1. Okay. Second best practice is about the structure system requirements, which is also same. This best practice is retained. So here we were normally talking about how do we normally structure the complete system requirement specification. Could it be with respect to the functionalities? Could it be with respect to the functional and non-functional requirements? Can it be with respect to by any other criteria? Yes. So then BP3, I think with BP3 also we have the same base practice in ASPICE 4.0. So change come in BP4. As we could see in ASPICE 3.1, we had analyzed the impact on the operating environment, and in ASPICE 4.0, it's been modified that analyze the impact on system context. So can someone explain what is the difference when it comes to the ASPICE 4.0? What has been really expected when it comes to impact on system context?
Right. So in BP4 in 3.1, it was more of an operating environment. So when we talk about operating environment, it can be a lot of things, right? It can be the complete vehicle as well, because your system itself will operate, the operating environment for the system is complete vehicle environment, where you have to have your interfaces defined. You need to check the impact of all the interfaces, etc. Of course, it did make sense. It still does make sense, because you need to have interfaces defined for your system as well. But by defining specifically in 4.0 the system context, it makes things very much clearer. So you are writing system requirements and you are analyzing the impact of those requirements on your system. Your system includes, of course, the hardware, mechanical, software, etc. So you are mainly analyzing the impact there. Because when you are deriving the system requirements, you are implicitly deriving something. So from the stakeholder requirement, you have one line requirement, which will then be, subdivided into multiple system requirements, which is very much mostly applicable to your system, and very less information will be required for from the context of the vehicle. So if it is in the context of vehicle, of course you have the external interfaces to the system where you will already look into, for which you would have already analyzed during your technical feasibility. So this is where implicitly you would have done the analysis of the impact on operating environment. But when you come to the system itself, the most important thing here you would be doing is considering each of the requirement that you have derived in the system requirement, and check what is the effect of that requirement to your system. This is what I see as a biggest advantage in 4.0 BP4 in SYS2.
Right. So, I mean, as per my understanding, the main change here, what I see is like in 3.1, and it was mentioned like operating environment, and now in 4.0 it is changed to system context. So, operating environment, it was specified that like uh, operating environment is a role like specified system and other elements of the operating environment. So my understanding of that is like this system and maybe other systems which are being like interacted, which are interacting with this system maybe, and maybe we have to like identify those interfaces and analyze the impact. While in 4.0, as I understand, like it is just impact on the system context. So maybe it is just seeing the elements of this system and the impact on all the elements only in this system maybe. So maybe that's my opinion.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, overall, it looks like the PP4 has been made a bit more precise in ASPICE 4.0. Now, when it comes to the execution part, because I mean, we have been part of the projects where we had to show some evidence that we did analyze the impact on the let's say operating environment in the past and in the future on the system context. So my question is, what is the better way of showing this evidence? Is it more kind of a review we have to do, or is it more kind of a simulations we have to do and show some result? I mean, what is an ideal way of clearing this particular base practice?
That's a very interesting question. The reason being, what kind of impact are you going to check on the operating environment or the system context? So how would you do it? Because you in your requirement phase, you're still deriving the requirements. And if you ask, okay, what kind of memory impact does it have? What kind of performance impact does it have? As you rightly mentioned, you would have to do some kind of simulation or maybe a proof of concept development before you can actually say that you did something, right? Of course, you can always claim that if you are having a legacy system based on your previous experience, when you are adding couple of new features, based on the previous experience, of course, you can derive some data, and on top of the derived data, you're kind of making a theoretical assumption, and you are going to validate it once your implementation is complete. On the other hand, what you can also check is, the simulation part is taken care of. So right, so you try to simulate if it is a new product, you are building it for the first time, you would have to uh, get some I don't know, some development boards where you would try to figure out. the core functionality, and then try to add more and more modules, and then see how uh, it impacts on the other, let's say, the system context or the operating environment. Now, these are with respect to main points like memory, performance, the CPU, etc. Apart from that, there are other factors I would consider when we are talking about this impact on the system environment. And those are like, let's say you have some signals, right? Now, when we are talking about the signals, right from the start till the end, what is the amount of time it would take? So if you do that, uh, you can get to know, like for example, there is a specific term in the functional safety, FTTI, fault tolerance time interval. So you can get to know the signal timing, which you don't have to implement things, but rather you can just get to know all these things during your architectural design phase itself. In which case, it would be an iteration. That means you derive a system requirement, you go update your architecture, do the analysis there, come back, update certain things. So this way, it can also act as an evidence that, hey, I have derived the requirements, I checked for, let's say, this input signal, which all modules are getting affected, and what kind of time criticality does this have, and then you can probably show this as evidence. This is how I see as some of the evidence that you can provide for analyze the system, analyze the impact on the system context.
All right. So with respect to BP5, I mean, develop verification criteria, so it has been taken out. Can we go to the next slide? Since we are talking about the verification criteria, which has been added as an inherent part of the requirement, specification. We also have colleagues who have worked on SYS2, especially on the verification criteria, defining the verification criteria as a part of the ASPICE 3.1. Now, if it has been removed in the ASPICE 4.0, I'm sure there would have been some issues with respect to this particular base practice or with respect to the verification criteria. So what was the challenge when it comes to the verification criteria in ASPICE 3.1?
Well, maybe if I have to answer with respect to the 3.1, since there was a specific base practice for adding verification criteria, and also if you see the VDA guidelines, there is also a guideline which says that your requirement process is 2 or BSW1 should not be rated fully if there is no textual description of verification criteria. So this was one of the key factors. Let's take up the requirement writing. Right. So ASPICE just says that you write the requirements, but every other company will have their own set of principles. So there is smart way of writing principles, writing requirements, years principle. So there are many ways the way you write a requirement. And also, while doing your review, you would have certain review checklist, and some of the common checklists coming from probably ISO 26262 or 21434 will also be that your requirements must be atomic if you are writing it in the natural language. Of course, if you are in SLC or D, yes, syntax and semantics comes into picture. But if it is natural language, then you need to have things very atomic, testable, etc. As a requirement engineer, if I'm following these principles, to make sure that my requirement is testable, measurable, atomic, simple, by default, it would give me, what is it I'm looking for when this requirement is complete? How would I verify this requirement, right? Just for the sake of the guidelines from the VDA or ASPICE 3.1, in most of the cases, it was mandatorily required by me to maybe add in a bit of extra text for verification criteria. So if you ask me, I would write as verification criteria, and I would write down, okay, maybe if let's say I'll take a diagnostic feature. So the system shall respond with the ECU identification number when DID blah 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 is requested, right? Now for this, the verification criteria is that ensure that the identification number is so and so, right? It is quite implicit. Why would I want to write again? So this was kind of a challenge. I mean, if you don't write, of course, then you wouldn't end up, getting fully in your SYS2 or SWE1 processes. This way, I feel that, by removing this, it is kind of helpful. It would definitely reduce work because your system requirement, once it is complete, it is also communicated to all the key stakeholders here being system architects and the system test engineers, right? So the test engineers will eventually read through the requirement and then derive their test cases and also the test environment. So this way, if there are any complexities involved, like, some specific things, some preconditions required, your requirement must happen when the system is in sleep mode or in normal operation, etc. Sure, you can add it as a note. But having a specific verification criteria was quite a challenge, and removing that definitely helps in reducing a huge amount of efforts in SYS2. So this is what I have a key takeaway from this ASPICE 4.0.
Mm. And also to add on, I mean, why it has been removed is something we can definitely understand because sometimes the requirements are pretty clear. There is nothing more to, let's say, define as a verification criteria in a textual form. Sure, it makes a bit of a redundant work. There is a reduction. But if I see from the other aspect, like, assessing aspect, in ASPICE 3.1, let's imagine you had a separate base practice. Yeah, if your requirements are not that clear when it comes to the verification of part of it, maybe that base practice would have been downrated. Now, since it is considered as an inherent part of your base practice one, if it is taken as really critically as a part of the base practice one, then it would impact the rating of the entire, let's say, level one of SYS, let's say SYS2, right? Because then comes the VDA guideline, because if it is downrated, you cannot rate other base practices higher than this kind of a things will come in place, because BP1 is the important one, of course, and definitely we want to land in largely, or in the best case fully, in BP1 so that our overall result is not affected. So I see there could be some challenges with respect to how we rate BP1, because of course SSS who have been bit used to looking at the verification criteria will continue to look at the verification criteria, even though it is an inherent part of the requirement. So I hope it wouldn't impact the BP1 so much in ASPICE 4.0. Then when it comes to the BP6 and BP7, colleagues, now both the base practices have been merged into one, which is BP5 in ASPICE 4.0, which is ensure consistency and establish bidirectional traceability. So I think in one of our earlier video where we compared both the version of the standard, we have also discussed in detail, is there an advantage or what is the impact of, combining these two base practices into one. So this is where we don't have to dwell a bit deeper into this topic. And when it comes to the BP8, earlier we had communicate agreed system requirements, and now we have, communicate agreed system requirements and impact on the system context. So it has been modified a bit, which means not only we are communicating the system requirements, there is also a bit of a stress on communicating the impact on this system context. So can someone tell me what does it mean? What does this particular change mean in ASPICE 4.0? What should we do additionally in comparison to what we have done in ASPICE 3.1?
Okay. So yeah, as per my understanding, in 3.1, BP8 was about communicating the system requirements. So whatever system requirements are created, that has to be maybe communicated to the affected parties. Here in 4.0, now additionally, I think maybe if the new system requirements are created, or whatever parties are impacted based on these system requirements, those parties also maybe communicated, like what are the impacts they have to consider on their work based on the system requirements. So yeah, I think that's my understanding.
Mm. Yes, I mean, see, I mean, in the past, it was just about communicating the system requirement. Whenever we make a baseline, whenever the review happens, of course, we communicate internally within the organization. And sometimes, okay, if at all customer wants to have a look at it for some reason, then we also need to pass it on to certain stakeholders. So with a new modification in this particular best practice, I think what will also be checked is what information is being communicated, because like earlier, if at all we are just communicating certain baselines, I think it is not sufficient. We also have to take care if there are certain, let's say critical thing which have been identified when it comes to BP4. This information also need to be communicated to relevant stakeholders. Let's imagine we see certain requirements related to timing which cannot be met, when it comes to the system level. Maybe certain stakeholders needs to be communicated. Most likely it's an OEM or customer who is affected by the deviation in this particular requirement. So I believe, um, the project teams, how would it impact the project teams? The project teams need to be a bit more careful with respect to this space practice, because in the past it was very easy to let's say show the evidence for this particular base practice, right? Because of course the perspective of the assessor would change, because some assessor would expect some kind of an email as a communication evidence, some would expect some kind of a ticket, some would expect some kind of a documentation in the configuration item list, which acts as evidence for the communication. But now I think with the ASPICE 4.0, the BP6, it makes it a bit more challenging, because it's not just about communicating certain baselines. We also have to show the evidence that certain things have been identified as a part of BP4, and that is also have been communicated to certain stakeholders who are impacted by this. So yeah, I'm just trying to think if there can be certain examples like the one I said, the timing requirement coming from the customer. Maybe it impacts certain change even within the organization. Maybe some software feature has to be updated or modified, or maybe some hardware functionalities are required in order to support certain requirements. Then there should also be certain evidences need to be maintained that we communicate this kind of changes actively. Yeah, because earlier the case was I have a baseline for system requirement, I pass it on to hardware and system guys, and they will analyze and they try to derive their requirements. That time they will identify. But now with the BP6, I see that along with those baselines, you also need to communicate the critical things separately or on top. So yeah, that's my feeling.
Okay, so one question I have, what are the weaknesses of ASPICE 4.0 with respect to, especially with respect to the SYS2, that is system requirement analysis?
Okay, I mean, maybe I'll start and I would let you guys jump in or add on something on top. Especially with respect to ASPICE 4.0, I mean, there were a lot of expectations with respect to, how would it clear up some of the confusions which were already, the project teams or the assessor faced when it comes to ASPICE 3.1, right? So I think some of them have been cleared, like the verification criteria, which was available as a separate base practice in the past, which have been removed now, which is good, but implicitly added into, let's say, BP1. Sure, not a separate base practice. We can live with that. Apart from that, I always felt that the standard itself is not well described. In the sense, I'm not expecting a standard to be too specific. Of course, then we cannot call it as a standard, which is understood. However, even when we define a standard, there has to be some context given, like what is expected. Where exactly we see this problem? especially with respect to BP4. Yeah, now there is a modification. You can see that BP4 analyzed the impact on the operating environment, which was there in the past. Now BP4 is analyze the impact on the system context, yeah, which has been modified a bit. What was challenging in the past? Even though this base practices was let's say available from a long time, because ASPICE 3.1 has been used in the running project from quite a long time. I think most of the project teams were not clearly aware what to do for this, how to satisfy this particular base practice. I wouldn't say it is always the problem only with the project teams. Sometimes even assessors were also not sure. This is our personal experience. In some cases, assessors expected some kind of a review, which has been done, where we, let's say, do kind of a review to identify, okay, is there an impact on the memory because of this requirement? Is there impact on, I think, the bus load or something like this when it comes to the operating system, operating environment? And in some cases, something else was expected. It was not really clear. That's the problem with the standard. Now, if you see the ASPICE 4.0, I think it's been made worse. Because if at all you look at this particular version, of course, you cannot explain too many things in a base practice. So that's where the notes come in handy, right? You write something in the base practice, and in the notes you say this could be some of the examples. And if you see BP4, it has got no notes at all. Yeah. So which means now people are going to pursue based on their experience. It's as simple as that. And especially there is a bigger challenge when it comes to assessment, provided an assessor has not worked on this particular, let's say, process on his own. If at all he never worked as a system engineer, it is very difficult to convince them, or let's say defend this particular BP4, because they can expect anything when it comes to analyze the impact on the system context. What does that mean? I mean, even if you go through the description of the BP4, analyze the impact that the system requirement will have on elements in the relevant system context. What does that even mean? There is no notes at all whatsoever. And I think this is really not ideal. And I think this kind of a thing should have been corrected in ASPICE 4.0. We had so much of time. We definitely could have done much more better. That's my takeaway when it comes to what is not so good in the new version of the standard.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The reason being that, impact on the operating environment previously when it was 3.1, it is clear, very unclear. I mean, even if we see 3.1, there were no notes on BP4 for analyze the impact on operating environment. Right, of course, it did give a couple of extra sentences saying that you check for the interfaces and the operating environment, or maybe the other elements in the operating environment. But what exactly are you looking for is a biggest question. Now, uh, if you are a project team member, when you're trying to do something, you obviously have this question, okay, how would I evaluate this? When you're talking about bus load, what would be my bus load? I will only get to know the bus load once I get to probably the architecture, or maybe in some cases after I implement. But you are trying to do this at the requirement stage. Sure, the whole thing is a iterative approach, but how would you check the impact at this level? If it is a let's say legacy product, sure, you would be doing it based on the experience. Otherwise, I think it would be a good let's say help to the project team members if we as a spice or the Intex group itself has some guidelines or some kind of help text on what could be this system context, what could be the how what are the ways to you can check the impact on the system context, which again implicitly also kind of bring us to the BP6 topic in 4.0, which is communicate agreed system requirements and impact on the system context, right? So the BP6 just says that communicate the results of the impact analysis that is done to all the relevant stakeholders. Maybe some note would have been helpful over there as well.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of a thing should have been covered. That's my opinion, or at least VDA guideline should address this kind of a thing. I don't know if VDA guideline really addresses this particular part. But the challenge is really to the project teams, yeah, because it's not fun working as a part of the project team and trying to defend an assessment, because we have seen in the past two different assessors from the same organization can rate a same evidence in a two different way. We have seen it in the past. Now, if the assessors are from two different companies, forget about it. We can't really expect them to rate in the same way. I at least expect, okay, within the same company, they should have some kind of a mechanism where they, let's say, talk to each other and come to a conclusion that, okay, this kind of evidences are sufficient and we rate this way. But we have seen, difference there. And the project teams cannot really work based on somebody's perspective. That's not possible, because you cannot really think about how would somebody perceive this evidence. That's not it's going to work. Yeah, then it is not a standard. So this is where I see definitely a challenge here. I mean, sure, they have kept it, they have modified a bit, but there should have been definitely more information, like what is being expected, or at least minimally what should be covered. Okay, sure, systems are not going to be same, there will be difference. Then what do you analyze will also differ, but you cannot keep it like open and give a chance to a lot of speculation here. Okay, this could also be done, that could also be done, because there so many things you can do, but at least the minimum basic criteria should have been mentioned. That's my feeling when it comes to BP4.
Fantastic. Then, so I hope you guys got a good insight of what the big and key differences are between ASPICE 3.1 and 4.0, specifically for SYS2, System Requirement Analysis. Less work, of course, because less base practices. So kudos to that. Uh, we hope that the whole session was informative. Thank you so much for watching this session. Uh, do please subscribe and share this video. Keep waiting for much more exciting contents in future. Thank you.